They crave connection, yet run from it. They want to feel chosen, yet pull away the moment it feels real. This is the avoidant attachment paradox, and it's one of the most misunderstood emotional patterns in relationships. Avoidants don't fear love itself. They fear what love awakens inside them. At the surface, avoidants appear independent, self-contained, and emotionally unbothered. They move slowly, keep conversations light, and delay emotional investment. But underneath that calm exterior is a nervous system trained to associate closeness with pressure, expectation, or emotional loss. Intimacy doesn't feel safe, it feels demanding. Here's the paradox. The more meaningful the connection becomes, the more powerful the attachment grows, and the stronger the urge to escape. Avoidants bond slowly because their mind is scanning for emotional risk. They test distance. They regulate closeness. They convince themselves they don't need much. But when someone remains consistent without chasing, warm without invading, present without pressure, something unexpected happens. Their defenses weaken, not consciously, psychologically. This is where attachment forms quietly. Once attachment takes hold, it doesn't look gentle. It's intense, confusing, and often unspoken. Avoidants feel deeply, but they don't know how to hold those feelings without losing control. So they detach behaviorally, while remaining emotionally bonded. They pull back not because they don't care, but because they care more than they know how to manage. That's why avoidants send mixed signals, why closeness is followed by distance, why they struggle to detach even after walking away. The paradox isn't that avoidants don't want love, it's that love feels safest to them from a distance, and most dangerous when it's real. Understanding this paradox changes everything. It replaces self-blame with clarity, confusion with insight, and emotional chaos with psychological awareness. Avoidants don't delay emotional bonding because they're careless with hearts. They delay it because emotional closeness activates something they've spent a lifetime learning to control. At first, avoidants seem calm, charming, and self-sufficient. They enjoy connection in measured doses. They show interest without urgency, affection without depth, and presence without emotional exposure. This isn't indifference, it's regulation. For an avoidant nervous system, bonding too quickly feels like stepping into emotional quicksand. Once you sink, escape feels impossible. Emotional bonding requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires surrender. Avoidants learned early, often without realizing it, that relying on others came with unpredictability, disappointment, or emotional overwhelm, so they adapted. Independence became safety, self-containment became strength. Delaying bonding wasn't a strategy, it was survival. What truly slows avoidance down isn't fear of love, it's fear of losing emotional control. Bonding means needs. Needs invite expectations. Expectations feel like obligations, and obligations feel like being trapped in someone else's emotional world. So the avoidant mind stays alert, scanning for signs that closeness might turn into pressure. This is why avoidants move carefully. They test space. They pull back after good moments. They keep emotional conversations abstract rather than personal. Every pause, every delay, is an attempt to stay balanced, close enough to feel something, far enough to feel safe. Yet beneath this caution is a quiet longing. Avoidants do want connection. They just want it without losing autonomy, without being consumed, without reliving old emotional chaos. When someone moves slowly, respects boundaries, and doesn't demand reassurance, bonding begins to feel less threatening. Safety replaces urgency. Ironically, the longer avoidants delay emotional bonding, the deeper the eventual attachment becomes. Time allows trust to form without pressure. Consistency softens defenses. Emotional reliability becomes proof that closeness doesn't equal loss of self. That's when something shifts. Avoidants don't announce this change. They don't suddenly become expressive or vulnerable. Instead, attachment forms silently, through familiarity, emotional steadiness, and the absence of force. By the time they realize they're bonded, the connection already holds emotional weight. Understanding why avoidants delay bonding reframes everything. It's not rejection, it's protection, not disinterest, but self-preservation. And when approached with patience rather than pressure, what once felt impossible slowly becomes emotionally safe. Avoidants aren't driven by coldness. They're driven by a fear so quiet, so deeply internalized, that even they rarely recognize it. The hidden fear controlling avoidant behavior isn't abandonment, it's emotional engulfment. At some point, closeness stopped feeling nurturing and started feeling overwhelming. Love became associated with pressure, expectations, or the loss of personal space. So the avoidant nervous system learned a rule: stay connected, but never fully exposed. Care, but don't depend. Feel, but don't fall too far. This fear doesn't announce itself as panic. It shows up as logic, as independence, as the belief that needing someone is weakness. Avoidants convince themselves they function best alone, not because it's true, but because relying on others once felt unsafe. When emotional intensity rises, this fear activates instantly. Texts feel heavier, conversations feel loaded, affection starts to feel like a demand rather than a gift. The avoidant doesn't think, "I'm scared." They think, "I need space," and space becomes the emergency exit. That's why avoidants pull back right after moments of closeness. The bond deepens, and the fear whispers, "You're losing control." To regain balance, they distance themselves, not to punish, not to manipulate, but to breathe again. Ironically, the stronger the emotional connection, the stronger this fear becomes. Attachment doesn't calm the avoidant nervous system, it challenges it. Love threatens the identity they built around self-reliance. So they protect that identity, even at the cost of intimacy. This fear also explains the mixed signals: warmth followed by silence, presence followed by withdrawal. The heart moves forward while the nervous system slams the brakes. Understanding this hidden fear changes how you interpret avoidant behavior. It's not a lack of feeling, it's too much feeling without the tools to hold it. And until emotional safety replaces emotional pressure, this fear will quietly remain in control. Avoidants rarely say what's really happening inside them. Not because they're hiding something from you, but because they're fighting something within themselves. Their internal conflict is simple in structure, but brutal in experience. The desire for closeness versus the need for emotional control. On one side, there is longing, a genuine wish to connect, to feel chosen, to experience warmth without armor. Avoidants feel this more than they admit, sometimes more than they realize. They imagine intimacy, stability, and emotional safety. They want the comfort of being understood. On the other side, there is a deeply ingrained alarm system. This system doesn't respond to danger, it responds to dependency. The moment closeness starts to matter, the nervous system reacts as if autonomy is under threat. Emotional attachment feels like losing leverage over their own inner world. This is where the conflict becomes unbearable. Avoidants don't think, "I don't want you." They think, "I don't know how to want you without losing myself." So they hesitate, they delay, they intellectualize emotions instead of feeling them. They convince themselves they need space when what they truly need is reassurance that closeness won't cost them freedom. This silent battle creates contradictions. They reach out, then disappear. They open up, then shut down. They crave emotional security, yet resist emotional exposure. Each move toward intimacy triggers a counter-move toward distance. And because avoidants struggle to name this conflict, it leaks out behaviorally, through mixed signals, through sudden withdrawal, through emotional ambiguity that leaves others questioning their worth. What makes this conflict especially painful is that avoidants often blame themselves for it. They believe something is wrong with them, that they're incapable of love, that they're better off alone. In reality, they are caught between two equally powerful needs: connection and self-preservation. Understanding this internal conflict doesn't excuse hurtful behavior, but it explains it. And explanation is the first step toward emotional clarity, for them and for anyone trying to love them. Attachment doesn't begin for avoidance during passion, romance, or intense emotional conversations. It begins in a moment so subtle, it often goes unnoticed even by them. The exact psychological moment attachment starts is when emotional safety is felt without emotional demand. Avoidants are constantly monitoring one thing: will this closeness cost me my freedom? As long as the answer feels uncertain, their defenses stay intact. But when they experience connection without pressure, no chasing, no emotional interrogation, no expectation to perform intimacy, something inside them relaxes. This moment usually arrives quietly. It might happen when someone respects their need for space without withdrawing affection, when boundaries are honored without punishment, when warmth remains steady even in silence. The avoidant doesn't feel pulled or pushed, they feel unthreatened. That's when the nervous system shifts. Instead of bracing for emotional impact, it settles. Instead of scanning for escape routes, it stays present. The avoidant realizes, often unconsciously, I can be myself here without being consumed. This realization doesn't spark excitement, it sparks calm. And calm, for an avoidant, is intimacy. Attachment forms not because the person proves their worth, but because the connection proves its safety. Emotional consistency becomes more powerful than emotional intensity. Predictability replaces pressure, and in that stability, the avoidant begins to attach. What makes this moment so powerful is that it bypasses logic. The avoidant doesn't decide to attach. They notice they care. They think about the person during quiet moments. They feel unsettled at the idea of losing them. The bond has already taken root. Ironically, once attachment begins, fear soon follows. Caring creates vulnerability. Vulnerability threatens control. This is why avoidants often pull back shortly after this psychological shift, not because attachment didn't happen, but because it did. Understanding this moment explains the confusion. Attachment doesn't start with fireworks. It starts with safety that doesn't ask for anything in return. For avoidance, attachment doesn't grow gradually. It arrives all at once. One moment, there's emotional distance. The next, there's a weight they can't name. This sudden intensity isn't dramatic exaggeration. It's delayed emotion finally catching up. Avoidants spend a long time holding their feelings at bay. They regulate closeness, downplay attachment, and keep emotional experiences compartmentalized. They don't stop feelings from forming. They postpone feeling them. So when attachment finally breaks through their defenses, it doesn't trickle in, it floods. The intensity comes from contrast. Emotional distance creates a false sense of control. When that control slips, the difference is jarring. What was once manageable now feels overwhelming. The avoidant isn't reacting to the present moment alone. They're reacting to everything they didn't allow themselves to feel earlier. Another reason attachment feels so strong is unfamiliarity. Avoidants are not practiced at emotional immersion. When closeness deepens, they don't have the internal framework to regulate it smoothly. What might feel steady to someone else feels consuming to them. Intimacy activates vulnerability, and vulnerability feels amplified when it hasn't been safely experienced before. There's also an element of emotional accumulation. Small moments that seemed insignificant, shared routines, quiet understanding, emotional reliability, have been silently stacking. When attachment activates, all those moments suddenly carry meaning. The bond feels deep because it has already been building under the surface. This intensity often triggers fear. The avoidant mistakes emotional depth for emotional danger. They interpret caring deeply as losing autonomy, not gaining connection. So the same attachment that feels meaningful also feels threatening. That's why intensity is followed by withdrawal. It's not rejection, it's self-regulation. The avoidant pulls back to regain emotional balance, not because the attachment vanished, but because it became undeniable. Understanding why attachment suddenly feels intense reframes the experience. It isn't impulsive, it isn't unstable. It's the natural result of emotions that were delayed, compressed, and finally allowed to exist. Once avoidants form a deep emotional attachment, their behavior often becomes a confusing mix of closeness and distance. This is the classic push-pull dynamic. And it isn't random. It's a reflection of the internal battle raging beneath their composed exterior. Avoidants crave connection, but they also fear it. Deep attachment triggers vulnerability, which can feel like losing control. The more they care, the more their nervous system reacts with caution. This creates an almost instinctual oscillation. They move closer to feel intimacy, then pull away to protect themselves. Every act of closeness activates fear, and every act of withdrawal restores a sense of control. For partners, this behavior can feel like emotional whiplash. One day the avoidant is warm, present, and deeply engaged. The next, distant, detached, or seemingly indifferent. It's not a reflection of inconsistency in love. It's a reflection of the avoidant's struggle to reconcile desire for connection with fear of vulnerability. The push-pull pattern also serves as a self-regulation mechanism. Pulling away temporarily relieves the anxiety of emotional intensity, giving them space to process feelings without feeling overwhelmed. Pushing, however, is not permanent rejection. It's a pause. Similarly, pulling someone closer reaffirms their trust that connection can exist without suffocating them. Ironically, this behavior strengthens attachment rather than weakens it. The oscillation keeps both parties emotionally engaged and prevents the avoidant from fully retreating, while teaching the partner patience, understanding, and emotional boundaries. Understanding push-pull dynamics reframes confusing behavior. It's not about manipulation or lack of love. It's about how deeply the avoidant feels while still protecting themselves. Recognizing this allows partners to respond with empathy instead of frustration. transforming the cycle of tension into an opportunity for deeper, more stable connection. Push-pull is messy, yes, but it's also a sign that attachment exists and that it matters deeply. Avoidants often give the impression that detachment comes easily to them. They pull away, maintain distance, and sometimes vanish without warning. But behind this calm exterior lies a truth most people don't see. Once emotionally attached, avoidants struggle to let go. The reason isn't stubbornness or cruelty. It's the paradox of attachment. Avoidants bond slowly, carefully observing emotional risks. When attachment finally takes hold, it bypasses their conscious control. They may not admit it, they may not show it, but the emotional connection exists at a profound subconscious level. It becomes part of their internal world, quietly shaping thoughts, feelings, and even decisions. Another factor is emotional investment. Avoidants spend so much time guarding themselves against closeness that when they finally allow vulnerability, it carries weight. Every shared moment, every act of trust becomes magnified in significance. Detaching isn't just leaving a person behind, it's undoing months or years of careful emotional processing. Their mind knows the bond is real, even if their heart still fears it. Moreover, avoidants value autonomy, but attachment doesn't respect logic. It seeps in quietly, threading through memories, routines, and emotional triggers. Walking away physically may be simple, but emotional detachment is a slow, painful process. It challenges their need for self-reliance while reminding them of what they truly care about. This struggle explains why avoidants sometimes return unexpectedly, feel conflicted, or remain emotionally tethered despite distance. Their withdrawal is a survival mechanism, but their attachment is a hidden anchor. Understanding this helps partners see beyond the surface. Their absence is not the absence of feeling, it's a protective response to a fear they cannot fully overcome. Emotional detachment is difficult for avoidants because attachment, once formed, is deep, undeniable, and impossible to erase overnight. It's proof that even the most self-contained hearts can bond profoundly, quietly, and permanently. Avoidants often believe that keeping distance protects them from emotional pain. They think that maintaining control, guarding vulnerability, and delaying attachment is the safest way to navigate relationships. But the truth they realize, often too late, is that closeness cannot be avoided without losing something essential. By the time this truth hits, attachment has already formed. The avoidant may have spent months or even years maintaining emotional walls, testing boundaries, and resisting intimacy. Yet paradoxically, the more they tried to stay distant, the more their subconscious mind clung to the connection. Love doesn't wait for permission. It grows quietly, persistently, even when they push it away. The avoidant finally realizes that emotional connection, when genuine and consistent, cannot be ignored or dismissed. They may have thought they were detached, self-reliant, and unaffected, but the bond is already imprinted in their thoughts, emotions, and daily life. This realization often comes with regret. The people they pushed away, the moments they missed, the closeness they delayed experiencing, all become painfully clear. Ironically, this truth is also a lesson in vulnerability. Avoidants discover that attachment is not a weakness, it is a strength. Emotional closeness can coexist with autonomy. Love can exist without losing control. And caring deeply does not mean being consumed. But the lesson often comes when the opportunity for unguarded connection is passed or changed, leaving them to navigate feelings that are too late to fully act on. Understanding this truth explains the pattern of return, hesitation, and internal conflict in avoidance. It's a reminder that emotional connection cannot be indefinitely postponed. The sooner they embrace intimacy without fear, the less painful and more fulfilling relationships can become. For avoidants, learning this truth earlier would mean experiencing love fully rather than realizing it too late, and that is the paradox that defines their emotional journey.